Is this the ultimate GBBR, or did Novritsch just release the world's most expensive paperweight? The SSQ4 is similar to a typical VFC GBB M4, but it comes straight out of the box with an HPA kit installed, meaning limitless shooting and way better precision. Now, I'm not a big GBB guy, but the value promise of this package was interesting enough for me to take a look. While there has been other HPA rifles like the Tipman M4, nothing has been that successful or easy to use out of box. The SSQ4 can run both HPA or gas, but I focused mainly on HPA as that's the main selling point. For clarity's sake, you should know that Novritsch company has no influence or knowledge about the review, but they are local to me and provided the product sample for my testing. The SSQ4 is a Wellpro KAC1 GBBR that has been modified by the Novritsch developers. It's not a MWS design, but it does take GBB barrels and high caliber buckings with some exceptions. The SSQ4 comes with a short stroke bolt, which does allow easier install of a folding stock kit, but honestly, this is the worst of both worlds. In my opinion, the stock configuration should have been a full bowl, and if not, then at least it should have come with the folding stock already installed. There is argument to be made for efficiency of a short stroke bowl, but ultimately that's not the point of GBBR, and with HPA, that should not be an issue. What clearly sets the SSQ4 apart is the HPA kit that's pre-installed in the receiver. Here's a rifle that you can just take straight out of the box, put 140 PSI HPA into, and play with. It just works. The external design is more spicy than your typical black M4. I honestly like it. It's modern without looking weird. The total cost of this rifle in the HPA configuration comes out to €550, and then you need a bottle and regulator on top as well. That's a bit on the high end. I was expecting around €300 to match the other Novritsch products, and 400, 450 at most. They also made their own midcaps for the HPA kit. They're good quality, affordable, and carry 120 rounds. That plays a big part in the affordability and ease of use. There are other options in the market, but not as easy or good as the SSQ4 solution. Frog Engineering also makes in-receiver HPA adapter kits, but these still require installation, custom mags, and potentially voids the main rifle warranty. Magwell adapters are easy to install, but leaves a big mag sticking out of the gun. With the SSQ4 is also a very in-depth video series from Novritsch that acts as a full manual. I think that provides a high value add to the product, as they don't hold back and cover how to do everything with the SSQ4. Looking through the externals, we can see a nice golden brown surface coating. I'm not blown away by the handguard design, but it's the right length and it has M-lock cuts. Both the handguard and outer barrel sits rock solid and straight, which is a good step up in quality compared to many other cheap guns. The handguard has a notch for the TDC wheel at the start, meaning that any aftermarket handguards will also require a similar machining cut to be installed, or a longer custom TDC stick. Due to the short stroke bolt, the forward assist does not work. There's no gas block or gas tube. Omitting these parts saves money, but I still think that's a shame that they didn't at least put a gas block in. Many of the screws I found to be subpar in quality. They're almost stripping immediately, especially with the tread lock that is required in a GBBR, so you need to be really careful with these screws everywhere in the gun. The HPA kit has an air hose that goes through a split trigger guard and into the pistol grip. It looks nice and it works okay. Again, I'm not a fan of the two small screws holding it together. They strip easily. I also found that the air hose gets squeezed right where it goes into the pistol grip. It has what almost looks like a cut in it from this edge on the pistol grip squeezing it. You can see that there's physically no room for the air hose to go through the opening. I'll admit that the gun worked regardless of this when I got it, but there's no way this was an intended design decision. The line can get damaged over time or severely limit the airflow, which could impact refresh rate or cycling power. I would not let this in any way discourage you from buying the SSQ4, but I would recommend that you fix it. It can be easily fixed with a grinding tool, and the hose can also be replaced. The shooting performance is outstanding. Novritsch company has always been focused on guns that are good for actually playing airsoft with, and this is no exception. You take it out of the box, connect 140 PSI, fill the max with .4s, and this gun will hit torso at 60 meters easy. That's pretty good for GBB out of box, at least something that's not a TM MWS. However, it really needs the heavy BBs. Forget using 0.25 or even 0.28s in it. Testing with 0.32s, we can see the spread is 1 to 2 meters, especially in height variants. The tire is about 50 centimeters wide. Now switching to 0.4, also at 1.5 joule, the consistency is immediately better. GBB users tend to use heavier BBs, yes, but being forced to use 0.4s and up is a bit crazy, especially for people in countries with a 1 joule limit. A 0.4 moves so slow in CQB. Though not recorded, I also pushed this rifle to the limits by installing a 550mm deep-bridged Lalex VSR barrel. Just with this barrel installed and shooting 0.48 at high power, the distance and accuracy was actually insane. It was extremely accurate and easily giving the best DMR rifles a run for the money. It could be very interesting to build DMR rifles on this platform. In all the testing I did, about 7,000 rounds, I experienced not a single shot BB or dam. I did a lot of FPS testing with different BB weights, but because the rifle comes with a floating valve, I'll just show one dataset instead. Testing the floating valve at 145 psi and with a 36 gram BB, I got these velocity measurements. 0.9 joule with a almost fully closed valve, and it's possible that it's not all that stable at this level. 1.6 joule at halfway open. This is the default configuration that the 1.5 joule bolt arrives in. And finally, 2.2 joule at fully open. Now, with the valve fully open, it was quite noticeable that the recoil was more sluggish. As these energy levels are with a 0.36 gram BB, you'll see slightly higher or lower energy depending on your actual BB weight, probably within 10 to 15% either way. It doesn't joule creep a lot actually. And all this is on the 278mm stock inner barrel. I know for sure that the power can go way higher with a longer barrel. So I tested also the same setup with the 555mm deep-bridged Lalex VSR barrel, and here a 0.36 comes out with 3.3 joule and a 0.48 comes out with 3.6 joule. So that should be enough. I also know that the system can shoot even harder than this. It's clear that it's limited by the airflow in the HPA kit. So I ran 200 psi black gas through a gas mag instead and achieved a staggering 5.7 joule with a 0.50 on the long barrel. Yikes. Safe to say, this rifle can shoot as hard as you need. This rifle is really air hungry, but that's probably within the norm for a GBB rifle. I let some of the local natives have fun with it, shooting 0.32s at 140 psi on a 0.8 liter tank. The air drinks so fast you can see it in real time. Looking at the meter, it drops about 1000 psi for 650 shots. This comes out to roughly 2000 rounds on a 0.8 liter tank starting at 3000 psi. That's fine if you have air refills at the fuel, but you need to plan for this if you go to longer events without refills. Getting into the internals, we start out with the Hopup. It's adjusted via a TDC wheel at the top. That's cool and it works well, though it wobbles a little bit. To get the Hopup unit out, you have to take out the TDC wheel, handguard, barrel nut, and outer barrel. This means you need the proper tools, a clamp, and a vise, especially the first time you take it apart. I think that's honestly really annoying, especially you have other handguards that are more cumbersome to reinstall with alignment. In this day and age, it should be possible to design something like a PCW that just drops out of the receiver easily, or with a single pin removed. That's exactly the kind of improvement that Novritsch company would usually do, and they haven't done it this time. Realistically, it requires the average consumer to bring their rifle to an airsoft tech just to change bucking or barrel. I absolutely do not recommend anyone to mess around with barrel nuts if they don't have the tools or experience. Doing so otherwise could end up with broken parts or the gun falling apart mid-game. The Hopup unit sits inside this two-component assembly here, a metal sleeve on the top and the outer barrel below it. It's held by 4 grub screws. These screws are thread locked in place, so again, a lot of extra work anytime you take this system apart. The screws don't clamp on the Hopup unit, they just hold it in position. Having removed that, the Hopup unit comes out easily. There's an O-ring under the Hopup unit that I assume slightly takes the impact of the loading. Overall, while I admit that it works, I don't like the design choices. This Hopup unit is effectively slightly loose in the receiver and moves in and out with every shot. The TDC adjuster pushes down on this lever, which in turn pushes down on the Hopup bucking via a hard plastic roll. This bucking is a Maple Leaf 60-degree silicone bucking. It has a very solid sleeve around it to hold it in shape and take any nozzle impact. Although it works, the bucking is very elastic due to it being silicone and not my first choice in a GBBR that needs abrasion resistance. When loaded, the BB sits almost halfway through the pads. You can install other TM GBB buckings by cutting the wing down. I tried a stock TM NWS bucking and a 4UAD bucking. Both fit fine. The 4UAD bucking was a little bit better with the lighter BBs compared to stock. The shape and material of the 4UAD bucking does also not stick out as much at the bottom of the sleeve, which is good. I also managed to do a custom install of the 4UAD Magnus Pro chamber. This is significantly better with lighter BBs, but it does require a fair bit of custom work. I'll be doing a more in-depth video on how to do this shortly after this video, so subscribe to catch it and yeah, let me know what else I can do for you. The inner barrel looks similar to a typical TM GBB barrel. It's made from brass, has a nice surface, 603mm inner diameter, and is 270mm long. The tightening cuts are a bit thinner than a stock TM barrel, being about 7.47mm versus 7.53mm. While this seems practically the same, it can cause issues with chamber assembly. You can do it, but you need to carefully check how they fit, and you might need to sand down the locking tabs on the Hopup unit slightly. The magazine is a bit like a normal AG midcap, but with a cutout for the HPA adapter. They have about 125 round capacity and have a good start and end pressure. I think they are well done and in good quality. The HPA midcaps actually have a little tab for the bolt catch system actuated by the BB follower, so in theory there is a functional bolt stop. However, in my testing and from other people's reports, you should not expect this to work honestly. It does work as it should if you're running the gas mags, but with the HPA midcaps, the bolt stop does not work. When you take the magazine out again, about 4 BBs will fall out. The bolt is a short stroke. It seemed to work okay within my period of testing, and Novritsch company also planning a full bolt replacement, so you're not stuck with this system in the future. The front part is aluminum with a cool gray color. The rear part is made from steel. The moving part of the bolt weighs about 118 grams, including the nozzle. There's also a steel bolt available, which ups the moving weight to 137 grams. Not a huge difference, and the felt difference is very small. The steel bolt may help with more reliable BB seating though, so there is that. They're connected and aligned via the spring guide up here. The rear part is just screwed on like this and sits loose. When I got mine, the rear part was actually unscrewed 2 turns for no reason, and others have experienced the same. When buying this rifle, you should check that this is done correctly, and they also instruct you how to do that on the Novritsch Academy. Pull down the recoil spring, screw it in gently, then back it out half a turn as needed, and voila. The recoil spring is obviously proprietary, so no upgrades there. It's quite strong for its size, and I think this works and feels reasonably when shooting. It's not like a KCU2, you'll definitely feel it. There has been reports of the recoil rod breaking right here, though mine didn't suffer any damage in testing. Novritsch company has included an extra recoil rod with the gun for now, and I've also been told that in the future the recoil rod will have improved strength. It says to replace it after 8,000 rounds, but this is actually incorrect, and what they meant was that the user reports indicate it could break after 8,000 rounds. In short, just play with it. It takes 1 minute to replace the rod and it requires no tools. But again, these are the problems that arise when including parts more complex than a normal full bolt, right? Moving on to the nozzle, here are some dimensions. The nozzle has a gas chamber length of about 25.60 millimeters. The cylinder ID is 19 millimeter. And the piston OD is 18.50 millimeter. The nozzle you see here, I haven't lubed yet, and it has fired about 7,000 rounds on HPA. It still seems to air seal fine. The O-ring on the nozzle seems to be from polyurethane. For this material, I recommend the low friction grease with PTFE here, but if you're worried about it coming into contact with the silicone-based bucking, you can also use the silicone-free grease instead. Both are fine. There is an impact pin with a spring, but it doesn't actually impact anything. This is probably because the nozzle is short stroke. You can see here that the nozzle does not go far enough out for this pin to impact. The piston head O-ring sits sufficiently tight in the cylinder, and the cylinder has a nice smooth surface. The nozzle length inside the cylinder is quite long. I think it has only 0.1 to 0.3 millimeters of free space, if any, for the gas to exit and push the nozzle out. This can potentially prevent an efficient start of the recoil, or maybe help the pressure build up before moving. Who knows, it still works. The extra plate here is what short strokes the nozzle. Also, when the nozzle is fully forward, there's no gas opening to degas it. Normally, it would extend far enough to open here, but not in this case. This causes the system to be under pressure after the hammer valve closes, potentially preventing the bolt from going back forward again. It's not designed correctly, but it is probably not an issue. It degases anyway when the nozzle moves away from the magazine seal. Inside the nozzle, we find a typical VFC floating valve with a grub screw to adjust distance. A simple design that works okay. The ID of this valve is about 4.45 millimeters. The floating valve spring is quite strong, significantly more than a typical TM-GBB spring. The strength of a floating valve spring is important for FPS stability, and it has to be matched to the rest of the system. Perhaps this is something that could be investigated more. Moving on to the built-in HPA kit. The top looks like a normal GBB mag. The empty mag function can be enabled or disabled, though as previously mentioned, it never works. To get the HPA kit out of the receiver, you need to remove the trigger set and the grip parts here. Looking inside the HPA kit, we can see a connector hose and a hammer valve. I've had reports from others that their HPA kits leaked straight out of the box, which can be fixed, but again, is a fair amount of work to disassemble. The HPA kit has a proprietary hammer wall and also what looks like a polyurethane seal on it. The opening in this valve is about 6.80 millimeters. The product specification recommends a pressure between 120 to 160 psi, with an optimal being about 140 psi. One thing to notice about the HPA kit is the lack of air buffer near the hammer valve. A normal gas mag has a huge gas chamber with evaporating gas that can sustain a pressure during operation. This is not the case with this HPA kit, where it taps directly from the airline. This means that the pressure will drop faster once the valve opens. The result from this is weaker shot power and weaker recoil. It's effectively the equivalent of running a way lower air pressure than normal. It should be noted that this is not uncommon. All the in-receiver HPA kits out there work this way. I asked Novritsch team about this and they do not see it as an issue. I agree that it's functionally not an issue. The gun works consistently this way. However, I tested this theory by HPA tapping one of the gas mags instead, turning it into an air buffer. HPA this way, the shot power was higher and the bolt movement significantly more snappy. The gun would also run reliably at much lower pressures. I had no problem running it at 90 psi this way. This is admittedly not relevant for the average user, but I thought it was interesting to explore. There's actually room in the magazine for a much bigger HPA adapter. A big part of the empty space is taken up by the Airhose having to fit and bend without kinking. An air buffer was not a concern for the Novritsch team, but instead of this hose design, they could have had a bigger air buffer here with a metal tube that screws in instead. Maybe something we'll see in the future. The gas mag has a different hammer valve than the HPA kit. At the bottom is 3 screws holding a plate with a seal under it. Again, the bad screw quality combined with aggressive leveler thread lock makes it near impossible to remove these screws. If you heat it up to loosen the thread lock, there's a good chance of melting the bottom seal. Except for the hammer valve, all the screws and valves in the gas mag are very solidly installed. The hammer valve is also made from steel on both the gas mag and HPA kit. I think it's actually a really decent quality magazine, and if anything breaks, it'll be the plastic part on top that you can easily replace. The trigger set looks like your typical airsoft GPBR trigger sets. It sits in a box that is held by pins and a screw. Please check the disassembly videos on Novritsch Academy for how to take this apart. I'm not going to take it apart at this time. That may be for a future video on how to maintain it. To lubricate it, I recommend the silicone-free grease with PTFE. The trigger itself is a straight trigger with a smooth surface. It works fine, but I'm not a fan of it. The finger tends to slide around on it. I would have preferred a normal AR-15 trigger or something with sharper edges. The trigger brake is pretty high for an airsoft GBBR. I would say it's pretty much perfect. There's almost no slack on the trigger, and the brake is very clean. I don't like the Selector. It moves okay, but it has wobble to it, and is made of plastic. The shape is uncomfortable for me. I don't feel like I have a good grip on it. Compared to a normal switch, the slope is much shallower, and this causes the finger to slide off of it. It's nitpicking, but I feel like if you redesign this part, it should at least be as good as the original design. Another big point is that the Selector can be switched to safe without the GBBR being cocked. This flies in the face of how a normal AR-15 operates. On top of that, trying to cock the rifle while it's unsafe and unloaded will cause the system to block and potentially break if forced. About wear. Over the course of about 7,000 rounds shot, this is what I found. Slight deformation on the stop bolt where it impacts the rear piece and the trigger sear. This would be even less with the steel bolt. Wear on the sear interface of the rear part. Deformation where the buffer retainer pin touches the rear of the bolt. Slight surface wear inside the bolt where the nozzle spring rides. Only surface wear on the interfacing parts between bolt and bolt stop. But granted, I don't use the bolt stop a lot with HPA. I mean, it doesn't work. Another thing I saw was a grub screw that sits right here in the trigger set under the bolt cats, had backed itself out, pushed the bolt cats up, and actually prevented the gun from running properly. So I just removed that screw. Now, the sample I got worked pretty well, but I've heard the following issues from other users by now. HPA kits that leak straight out of box, which can be fixed, but it's a fair amount of work to disassemble. One user had a strip receiver screw, which is the single screw that holds the trigger set in, except beyond the pins. Empty mag detection, of course, non-functional on HPA. Obviously, the kinked airhose at the grip on old guns, I assume. And also, people had guns that weren't shooting or just shooting like 3 rounds in semi or whatever. I don't know the scale of these issues. I don't know if it's 1% or 30% or whatever. So take that as you will and just keep an eye on it yourself. So what's the verdict? Well, I think the SSQ4 is a mixed bag. I think it does a good job of the important parts of shooting well out of box, taking HPA and running reliably. It'll probably last a long time and doesn't need lubrication constantly, though it did have a lot of the small flaws in the corners that I mentioned. Nothing that a tech can fix in an hour or two, but it's not without its flaws, especially if you're a user that don't want to tech anything. It looks cool out of box, which is great. It could easily have been a boring black rifle, but the externals look kind of cool. It also has good, cheap, well, relatively cheap midcaps available, which is a nice touch that you don't really get with other HPA kits. I'm 50-50% on recommending it. I think if you have some technical skill, it's a good buy, and it can easily be used as a primary rifle and not a novelty toy. But if you have zero technical experience or interest, you should know someone who's a tech that can help you out eventually with it. So, thanks for watching through my tech video. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments about the video or your own GBB rifle. I also have a Discord where I'm active most of the time. The link to that is in the description.